So why is it? Why is a novel that's 100 years old, all about these crazy parties on Long Island, still something that practically everyone reads in school? How does this story about a mysterious millionaire still feel so present, so relevant, a full century later?
To really get to the bottom of what makes Gatsby tick, we're going to peel back 5 key layers. We'll start with the dazzling story itself, and then we'll uncover the author whose own life is basically written between the lines. We'll explore the famous setting that defines everyone, unpack its powerful critique of the American dream, and finally, get into the book's own surprising journey from total flop to literary legend.
All right, so before we can dig into the deep stuff, we have to understand the glittering, chaotic surface. Let's just start with the story. The novel just drops you right into the summer of 1922. We're talking the peak of the jazz age, all that hedonism and energy, and our way in is through the world of this incredibly mysterious millionaire, Jay Gatsby, and his absolutely legendary parties on Long Island. You know, a total whirlwind of jazz, illegal booze, and glamorous people, all just drawn to him like moths to a flame. The plot itself plays out like a perfect 4-act tragedy. First, you've got our narrator, Nick Carraway, who shows up and gets sucked into the mystery of his bizarre neighbor. Then, the real motivation is revealed. This whole empire, all the parties, all the money, it's all just an elaborate stage to win back his lost love, Daisy. This all builds to a blistering confrontation in a hotel suite where everything just completely unravels. And finally, you get the tragic end. A hit and run, a murder, a suicide, and Gatsby's lonely death, which leaves Nick totally disgusted by the whole careless, wealthy world he's found himself in. But here's the thing. Gatsby's story didn't just come out of nowhere. It was incredibly personal, written from the author F. Scott Fitzgerald's own pain and his own life experiences. You see, that central, all-consuming obsession to win back a woman from a higher social class, that wasn't just a plot point for Fitzgerald. It was a pain he knew firsthand. It was a wound that, honestly, probably never really healed. And I mean, Fitzgerald drew this straight from his own life. The quote you're looking at here, it comes from his experience with a young socialite named Ginevra King. She was the real-life Daisy. And her father literally told him that poor boys shouldn't think of marrying rich girls. That rejection just haunted him, and it ended up shaping the very core of his most famous book. And when you look, the parallels are just uncanny. Just like Nick, Fitzgerald was a Midwesterner at an Ivy League school, always feeling like an outsider. Just like Gatsby, he was a young military officer who fell hard for a woman he couldn't have without a fortune. In fact, his own wife, Zelda, actually put off their marriage until he made it big as a writer. He even lived in Great Neck, the real West Egg, and he went to all those wild parties, all while secretly kind of despising the very people and world he was so wrapped up in. So, you take that personal struggle, and now you see how Fitzgerald blows it up into the novel's central social conflict. And this conflict is perfectly symbolized by its geography, the famous divide between East Egg and West Egg. Now, here's the key. The conflict isn't about how much money you have. It's about where it came from. East Egg, where the Buchanans live, that's old money. It's inherited, established, traditional. They think showing off your wealth is tacky. And then you've got West Egg, Gatsby's home. That's new money. It's self-made, it's flashy, and it's seen as less fashionable by the old guard. It's a full-on battle between inherited status and the new American get-rich-quick dream. And you know what? Fitzgerald wasn't just making this up. He based this whole map on the real Long Island of his time. West Egg was Great Neck, where the newly rich lived, and East Egg was the more aristocratic old money Sands Point. He was documenting a very real, very rigid social ladder that money alone simply could not buy her way up. This social battlefield is where the novel really gets into its biggest idea. Its powerful and frankly, deeply cynical take on the American dream. So the novel takes this core American idea, the belief that anyone can achieve anything if they just work hard enough, and it holds it up to the light. And it basically asks, is that really true? It suggests that maybe, just maybe, the dream is a beautiful illusion, and that some goals are just unreachable, blocked by a class system that will never let you in. And Fitzgerald uses some of the most iconic symbols in literature to hammer this point home. You've got the green light, of course, that symbol of Gatsby's gorgeous but impossible future with Daisy. You have the Valley of Ashes, this grim industrial wasteland that shows you the moral rot and the forgotten people hidden beneath all that glamour. And then, looking down on all of it, you have the giant fading eyes of Dr. T.J. Eckelberg on that billboard, like the eyes of an indifferent god just watching over a corrupt world. Now, for a book that we all agree is a masterpiece, maybe the most shocking twist of all is the real-life story of the book itself. It had its own rags-to-riches journey, from total failure to an American classic. It's hard to believe now, but when The Great Gatsby was published back in 1925, it was a complete commercial failure. I mean, it got some okay reviews, but the public just wasn't buying it. And Fitzgerald was devastated, convinced that all the critics had totally missed the point of what he was trying to do. Yeah, the sales figures were a disaster. The book sold fewer than 20,000 copies in its first year. Fitzgerald only made $2,000 from it. And he died in 1940, completely believing that he was a failure and that his greatest work had been totally forgotten.
So what happened? How did it turn around? Well, the book's unlikely savior was World War II. An organization called the Council on Books in Wartime printed and handed out 155,000 free copies to American GIs serving overseas. And for that generation, a generation facing its own huge hopes and bitter disappointments, Gatsby's story just hit different. It resonated. And their interest is what launched the critical revival that finally cemented the book's place in history.
And ever since that revival, the novel's reputation has just soared. Today, it sells more than 500,000 copies every single year, and it's an undisputed giant of American literature. In a way, the book's own story perfectly mirrors the themes of hope and revival that it explores. And in the end, that's really why we still read Gatsby. It holds up a mirror to this timeless, beautiful, and, often heartbreaking American search for a dream that always feels just out of reach. It leaves us all with a question that still echoes a century later. Are we all, in our own way, just reaching for our own green light across the water?